Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav and we'll be learning today Miras Hashem Daf Kuf Lamed Amid Aleph. We're continuing to learn the halachas of the Daled Minim. We pick up today on the bottom of Daf Kuf Chav Tes Amid Beis in Siman Taf Reish Nun Ches Sif Gimel. Now, we already began Sif Gimel and we learned two lengthy Mishnah Berurahs here on Kuf Chav Tes Amid Beis. I'm not going to do them again, but I am going to read the Mechaber from the beginning of Sif Gimel for the sake of continuity. So it says the Mechaber, Ein Adam Yoytze Yedei Chavasa B'Yom Rishon B'Lulav Shel Chaveroi Shehish Eloi. This is a halacha that we've discussed already several times. You cannot be Yoytze the mitzvah da'araisa of Daled Minim on the first day of Yom Tov using borrowed Daled Minim. Why? Says the Mechaber to be inon lochem, because we darshan from the pasuk. The pasuk says, wow, it's amazing how the words of the pasuk could just fall out of your head just like that. Ulakachtem lochem, and you need to take for yourself. Ulakachtem lochem priye tzadar kapes tamarim va'anafes avos va'arvei nachal. And we darshan from that word lochem, says the Mechaber, the be'inon lochem mishel lochem. They have to belong to you. And therefore you cannot be yotze your chiyuv on the first day of Yom Tov using a borrowed set of Daled Minim. Now we go to the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yud, all the way at the bottom of Kuf Chav Tes Amid Beis. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the be'inon lochem mishel lochem. Very interesting halacha, very pertinent halacha often, and people have to be aware of this. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Yesh Oimrim, there are those that say, he brings this down from the Shari Tshuva, who brings it down in the name of the Machaneh Ephraim. Yesh Oimrim, there are those that say, Dahani dekani esrog lemitzvah, those who go and they purchase lulav, hadassim, aravas, esrogim. I hope my stream, it looks like it was working. Those who purchase Daled Minim, upari la'achar hachag, and then they go ahead and they pay for their Daled Minim after Yom Tov. So they choose their Daled Minim from the Seicher, and they don't pay for it before Yom Tov. Instead, they pay for it after Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Lo Yo'us Avdi. Again, he's quoting the Shari Tshuva in the name of the Machaneh Ephraim, who says that they're not acting in a proper fashion. The Chol Kama de Lo Yohiv Dami, because as long as they have not paid for the Daled Minim, Lo Kani Elo Midrabanan, they were only kaina the Daled Minim B'Darabanan. Let's realize, in order for you to be Mekayim, in order for you to fulfill the Da'araisa requirement of Lochem, then min HaTorah, the Daled Minim have to belong to you. Now, the Daled Minim are metaltalin. They're movable objects, right? They're not real property. They're not real estate. They're not karka. They're not mechuber lekarka. They're metaltalin. They're movable property. And the halacha is that in order to be kaina metaltalin midaraisa, really you need the kinyan of kesef. The most basic way to be kaina metaltalin midaraisa is with the kinyan of kesef. You pay with money, and when the money transfers hands, so then the object that you bought becomes yours, and midaraisa you're kained. Now the Chazal wa misakin kinyanim midarabanan. So we know we have the kinyan of hagbah. You take something and you pick it up, you elevate it 3 tvachim, now you're kained it, it's yours. We have the kinyan of meshicha, where you take something and you pull it to you. So that's a kinyan of meshicha, a kinyan of hakbah. But these kinyanim are only midrabanan. These are not kinyanim midaraisa. So somebody goes ahead, he buys Daled Minim, and he goes, he says, okay, this is my lulav, this is my esrig. He makes hakbah on the esrig. I want to make sure I'm kainit, lochem, but then he doesn't pay for it. Now, that means that he did not affect the kinyan midaraisa of kesef. He only affected the kinyan midarabanan of hakbah. So he was only kainit midrabanan. But lachem is a daraisa requirement on the first day of Yom Tov. So therefore, says the Machaneh Ephraim, says the Shari Tshuva, the name of the Machaneh Ephraim, the Chol Kama de Lo Yoav Dami, if you purchased the Daled Minim, but you didn't really purchase them because you didn't pay for them, Lo Kani Ela Midrabanan. Even if you made Hagbah, even if you made Meshicha, you are only kind of them Midrabanan. And how do you then use that those daled minim to be yoytze your chiyuv daraisa if you need lachem. V'anan b'rinon lachem daraisa. Im loy, unless sheheviyo l'rishusai v'kanahu b'tayras chotzer. Unless what you did was you took the daled minim and you brought the daled minim into your house. If you brought the daled minim into your house, so then midaraisa you are kind of them with kinyan chotzer. But let's say you never brought it into your house. Let's say you purchased it on Erev Yom Tov and you left them in shul already, so you should have them on Yom Tov. You never brought it into your chotzer. You were never kind of with a kinyan chotzer. And therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, L'chatchila nachon lizayer bazeh v'lefraya kaidem achag. Therefore, the Mishnah Berurah makes the point, and he says that certainly l'chatchila you should make sure to pay for the daled minim before Yom Tov, so that you have the kinyan of kesef and you are kind of them midaraisa. Now, the Mishnah Berurah says this in terms of l'chatchila nachon lizayer. He doesn't say it really halacha lamaisa that you must do it and that you're not kind of. If not, then that's because there are those who disagree with this Machaneh Ephraim. Now, before we go to a Dirshu footnote that I wanted to read, let's take a look at the Shari Tshuva, the Shari Tzion, Ois Cotton Yud Gimel. Ayin b'Shari Tshuva b'Shem Machaneh Ephraim. This is based on the Shari Tshuva, who quotes it, the name of the Machaneh Ephraim. Va'agav, and the Chavetz Chaim says, once we mentioned this concept, Ershaim Oid Davar Cotton, I'm going to mention another small thing, Sheraisi, that I have seen, Afshehu Davar Pashut, even though really it should be a Davar Pashut, says the Chavetz Chaim, and I shouldn't even have to mention it. Achein Neshehu Motzoi, however, since it's common, Hochrachti Lekosvai, I felt forced to write it, says the Chavetz Chaim. The Hainu, and that is, Afilu Anoshim Acharedim, even very erliche people, Hazihirim Lekaim HaMitzvah Kitikuna Be'inyan Lachem, who are very careful, they're knowledgeable of this halacha, and they realize that we have a daraisa dika requirement of lachem. They're very cognizant of it, and they seek to fulfill it. Veloichim la'atzvam esrig veluliv v'hadasim u'mishalmim tekef, and they buy the lulav, they buy the hadasim, they buy the esrig, and they make sure to pay for it right away. Ala ravos eino makpidim. They're not makpid when it comes to the aravos. Let's remember that even here, nowadays here in the United States, the easiest one of the arba minim to come by are the aravos. They also have the least requirements. The hadassim, you have all sorts of issues. They have to be misholish. People want them to be misholish kulai, not just misholish rubai. And they don't grow locally. You have to bring them in. Arizona, California, Eretz Yisrael. The esrogim, for sure. Everybody works so hard to pick out a beautiful esrog. The lulavim are coming from Eretz Yisrael. But the aravos, I have enough aravos in my backyard. I could probably supply half the yeshiva community with aravos. So aravos are the easiest one. And therefore, very often, says the Chavetz Chaim here, people will leave the aravos to the last minute. And eino makpidim lahakid miba'id yom. They're not careful to make sure that before Yom Tov they have their aravos. The next Yom Tov morning, the Kishabon Lebeis HaMedrash, when they come to the shul, Mevakshim and Hashamish, they go over to the Shamish and they say, you have aravos? Sheyite lehem aravos. And they take aravos from the Shamish in shul on credit. Ube'emes b'chol arba minim tzarich lizar l'kayim b'hem lochem b'shleimus. And says the Chavetz Chaim, this is not proper, because the same requirement of lachem that applies to the lulav and to the esrig and to the hadassim applies equally to the aravos. And the same way we're saying over here in Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Yud, that you should make sure to pay for the esrig, you should make sure to pay for the lulav before Yom Tov, you should make sure to pay for the aravos before Yom Tov too, and you should not be using aravos that you took on credit because of this issue of lachem. Now, Mishnah Berurah, the Dirshu, in footnote number 18, he says over here, Ubir b'shalos tshuva shevet halevi, Rav Osler writes, Sha'afim ha'koine hevias esrig lebeisai. The Mishnah Berurah said that if you brought the daled minim into your house, you would kind them with kinyan chotzer. And kinyan chotzer is daraisa, so you cover your requirement of lachem daraisa. But Rav Osler says, Afim ha'koine hevias esrig lebeisai. Even if you did bring it to your house, mikal makan lo yisomchim bazeh al kinyan chotzer. Rav Osler says it's not so simple that we could rely on kinyan chotzer. Kevin sheroiv haseicherim eina makdim b'leiv shalem im loy pereya loy damim ba'avuroi. When you make a purchase, when you make a transaction, there's a koine and a makne. There's the koine, the one who's acquiring the item that's being purchased, and there's the makne, the moicher, the seller, who is giving over ownership to the new person. Now, if the makne does not have das makne, if the makne is not giving it over b'leiv shalem, then that makes a reisa in the kinyan. That kinyan is a little bit of a shvache kinyan. And Reb Vosner makes the point. He says a lot of the seicherim, they're not happy to be makne you the daled minim if you're not paying for it. The person who's in the business to sell a daled minim is not a bank. He's not interested in waiting for your payment until after Yom Tov. So yeah, he lets you take it, but is he being maknit b'leiv shalem? He's not being maknit. It's very possible that he's not being maknit b'leiv shalem. And if he wasn't maknit b'leiv shalem, then there's a chesaron in the lochem. He doesn't want to say that your mamash not yoitza, but there is a chesaron over here in the lochem, and therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, certainly l'chatchila, you should make sure to pay kaidem achag. You should make sure to pay before Yom Tov, so that you have no question on the lochem requirement. Okay. Now continues the Mechaber, top line, Kuf Lamed Amud Aleph. Va'afilu amar loy yehei shelacha ad shetetze boy. Let's say you don't have daled minim, so you're going to borrow the daled minim from somebody else, but you know that you can't be yotzei the mitzvah with borrowed daled minim because you need lochem. So the lender says to you the following lashon. He says, Yehei shelacha, the daled minim should be yours. Shelacha, they should be yours. Ad shetetze boy, until after you yotzei the mitzvah. So now, while you were being yotzei the mitzvah, it was yours. So the thought is that you're going to be mekayim lochem, because I said, Yehei shelacha, it should be yours. Ad shetetze boy, until you yotzei the mitzvah. And then after you yotzei the mitzvah, Yehei shali kibatchila, it should come back to me. So very interesting tonight that the person is trying to make. He doesn't want to make a matana amanas lahachzer. He doesn't want to say, I'm giving you a matana on the condition that you'll give it back to me, because now you still need to give it back to him. He doesn't want to trust you. He wants to set it up so that it should be automatic. You take it now, and it should be yours until after you mekayim the mitzvah. So while you needed it to be mekayim the mitzvah, you yotzei lachem because I said it's yours. And then after you mekayim the mitzvah, it automatically comes back to me. Sounds cute. Says the Mechaber, loy yotza, you're not yotzei. Why? Tehevi kemoi sha'ul. Because that has the status of being borrowed. That's not called that it's yours. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ois Katan Yod Aleph, Tehevi kemoi sha'ul, because that has the status of a borrowed daled minim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, de'ein zeh loshen matana. That's not a lashon of matana. I never gave it to you as a matana. I keven sheperish shehu rak lizman. Now this is a very interesting Mishnah Berurah to me. The Chavetz Chaim, when he wrote this Mishnah Berurah, he made a conscious decision to keep this very short and tight. And all the Chavetz Chaim said, he said it so carefully. He said that the problem is, and it's very interesting to me because he put in this one sentence, he makes mention of really two different problems with this scenario. First, he says, "De'ein zeh loshen matana." It's not a loshen of a matana. I didn't give you a matana. I said, "Sheyehei lecha," it should be yours ad shetetze boy until you're yotzei the mitzvah. It's yours mitam what? Did I give it to you? I didn't say matana. So I didn't give it to you as a matana. I was very careful to leave out the word matana, it seems. Did I sell it to you? I certainly didn't sell it to you. No money changed hands. So what does that mean, Yehei shelacha? And not only that, not only didn't I mention any kind of matana, I also didn't really give it to you. Kevich perish shu rak lizman. I gave it to you for a short amount of time. If you give somebody something for a short amount of time and it's automatically going to return back to you without him having to give it to you, then in what sense did you give it to him? What does that mean that you gave it to him? Does he have control over it? He doesn't really have control over it because it's going to revert back to you in 5 minutes. It's going to revert back to you. So what does it mean that you gave it to him? In what sense did you give it to him? But again, notice how the Chavetz Chaim says two different things. He says, De'ein zeh lashon matana. You never used a lashon of matana. So I think the implication of the Mishnah Berurah is, I don't know what it means that you gave it to him. You didn't give it to him as a matana. You didn't give it to him as a mechira. So in what sense did you give it to him? And kevet sheperush shehu rak lizman. And also, you put a timestamp on it. You made it it's only temporary. So you didn't use the lashon of matana, and you made it temporary. Now, I think it's the Aruch HaShulchan. Yeah, the Aruch HaShulchan says like this: Venirally, it appears to me, da'afilu Amar, even if the noisein, even if the lender would say, Yehei shelecha b'matana, that it should be yours as a matana, ad sheteitze boy, until you're mekayim the mitzvah, and then it should come back to me. Gam kein ein amoil. Aruch HaShulchan says straight out, Chavetz Chaim, you're focusing on one of the issues. You're focusing on the fact that he didn't use the lashon of matana. Says Aruch HaShulchan, even if he used a lashon of matana, since he said ad sheteitze boy, that it's only yours until you yotze the mitzvah, and then it automatically reverts back to me, gam kein ein amoil. That does not work. Shaharei ein zeh matana rak l'shah. Because again, it's a temporary matana. V'hadar havalei kishol. And that makes it like you're lending it to him, not like you're giving it to him. So the crux of the issue, certainly, according to the Aruch HaShulchan, the crux of the issue over here is that it's a matana l'zman. You gave it to him, but you only gave it to him for a short time. Now that stands in contrast to a matana al manas lahachzir. When you give a matana al manas lahachzir, you're not giving it only for a short amount of time. It's a matana. I'm giving it to you. It is yours. It's a matana. But the matana is conditional. The condition is you have to give it back. If you don't give it back, then l'mafreya, retroactively, it was never a matana. And it's as if you never had it. But it's not, I'm giving it to you, and you never even have to give it back to me. It automatically reverts back to me. If I give it to you, and I say, ad sheteitze boy, and then it automatically reverts back to me. So I gave it to you for 5 minutes. Giving it to you for 5 minutes is not a matana. If I give it as a matana al manas lahachzir, it's a matana. I'm giving it to you, but matana gemura. It's completely yours. But in order to affect it, ultimately you have to give it back to me. When? Well, we're going to see there are some conditions as to when you have to give it back. You have to give it back to me. If you don't give it back to me, then retroactively the matana was never a matana. But while it is a matana, it's a matana gemura. And that's what the Aruch HaShulchan says here. V'zeh she'amarnu b'matana al manas lahachzir, by a matana al manas lahachzir that we said works, she'tzarech she'yaksirenu loi, that ultimately you do have to give it back. V'im loi hechzer lo yotza, and if you don't give it back, you weren't yotze the mitzvah because you didn't fulfill the Tanai. Oh, actually, it's not over here. That's okay. I'm reading the Aruch HaShulchan. That's really something else. But that's a clear distinction between a matana al manas lahachzir and what this is over here. Now, what's the source for this? That this matana that's only temporary is not a matana. The source, there's really two sources in the Rishonim. There's a Ran and there's a Rosh. The Ran says like this. I wrote down the Lashon here on the side of my Mishnah Berurah. The Ran says, no, I'm sorry, again, I'm mixing myself up. It's not a Ran. This is only a Rosh. So Rosh, Perek Gimel, Siman Lamed. Let me read the Rosh to you. Very nice Rosh. Not that the Rosh needs my approbation. Here it is. Aval im Omar loy. If the Noisid says to the Makabel, Yehei b'matana, and you see the Rosh uses the word matana. Yehei b'matana, you should have these daled minim as a matana, ad sheteitze boy, until you're mekayim the mitzvah with them. Va'achakach yehi shali kibetchila. And then it should revert back to me like it was originally. La yotzaboy. The makabel is not yotza the mitzvah. Tehevi k'moy sha'ul. Because it's if it's borrowed. This is exactly the lashon of the mechaber. It's taken straight out of the Rush. Says the Rush, v'teda. And I'll bring you a raya that what I'm saying is true. Mida'ara l'kamon, because the Gemara says on Daf Memvav Amid Beis, Loi likni inish luliva liyanuka b'yuma tavakama. A person should not give his daled minim to a katan, to a minor child, on the first day of Yom Tov. Why? The yanuka makni kani, because the child could be kaina it. So when you give it to the child, he's going to be kaina it, he's going to acquire it. Aknuye loy makni, but he cannot be makni it back to you. So the Gemara on Memvav Amibay says, don't give your daled minim to a minor, to a katan, on the first day of Yom Tov. You want to give it to the katan because you want it to be b'kayim the mitzvah daraisa, and you want him to be able to fulfill the requirement of lachem, even though we said previously it's not so pashut that the requirement of lachem applies to a katan, but you want to give it to the katan, and you want to tell the katan, listen, I'm giving it to you, be kind it, lachem, first day of Yom Tov, lachem. But now you have a problem, because if you weren't yotzei the mitzvah yet, how are you going to be yotzei the mitzvah? The child could acquire it, but das makna he doesn't have. He can't give it back to you. So the Gemara says it's a big problem. You just gave away your daled minim to somebody who can't give it back to you. Right? So the Gemara Memvav Amibay says, don't give it to the cotton because you're going to wind up in a problem. Says the Rosh, I don't understand. What's the problem? If we have an eitzah where we can make this work where the child doesn't have to give it back to you, right? The eitzah of the mechaber. Go ahead, tell the child, I'm giving it to you with a matana, so it's going to be lachem, it's going to be yours. You can use it to be mitzvah the mitzvah. Until you're yotzei the mitzvah. And after you're yotzei the mitzvah, it should revert back to me. Says the Rosh, if that would be an eitzah, so let the Gemara Memvav Amibay. Why does the Gemara Memvav Amibay say don't give it to a child? The Gemara Memvav Amibay should say, go ahead, give it to the child and use this trick. Tell the child, Yehei b'matana, Yehei shalcha, until you're yotzei the mitzvah, and then afterwards it should revert back to me. I don't need you to give it to me. I don't need the cotton to give it back to me. I set it up in such a way that automatically it reverts back to me. Nihi the cotton lav baraknuyehu. So even though the cotton can't be makni to you, liknile, give it to him until he's yotzei the mitzvah. Valachsalei memela, and then automatically it will come back to you. Elavadai tzarech lachsar v'nitloloi b'matana v'cotton lav baraknuyehu. Elamai, says the Rush, from here you have a clear raya that this does not work. And the reason it doesn't work is because a matana l'shah, a temporary gift, is not a gift. That is not a matana. That doesn't mean that you gave it to the child. And in our case, it doesn't mean that you gave it to your chaver. If you told your chaver it's yours until you yotzei the mitzvah, that it automatically reverts back, that means that you didn't give it to him, and then you're only like a shoyl. Okay. Now we go to Sif Dalit, second line in the Mechaber. Says the Mechaber, Nisanoi loy almanas lahachziroi. But let's say you gave it to your chaver with a matana almanas lahachzir. You gave it to him a matana, you said, here's the daled minim, they're a gift, I'm giving you a matana, but the matana is conditional. It's conditional that you have to ultimately give it back. If you gave it as a matana manas lahachzir, you could use it, the makabel could use the daled minim to be yotzei the mitzvah, umachazira, and then he has to give it back. Shematana al manas lahachzir, shma matana. Because a matana al manas lahachzir, that is a real matana. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Yud Beis, shma matana, a matana manas lahachzir is not like a matana l'shah. The first case that we had, that Yehei Shalcha Teitzei Boy, that's a matana l'shah. That's a temporary matana. That's not a matana. A matana manas lahachzir is a real matana. Because when the noisin tells the makabel, this chayfetz is yours, I'm giving it to you as a matana, nifka kol koichai mimenu. He has now removed all of his strength, all of his power, all of his ownership has been removed from that chayfetz. I'm giving it to you as a matana. It's a matana gemura. It's completely yours. I can't sell it. I can't be magdish it. I can't do anything anymore. I am mafkia all of my koyach. I'm removing whatever strength of bailus, whatever strength of ownership I have, I'm removing and I'm giving it to you. Umasha amar amanas shetachzerli, and this that I hinge upon it upon a condition that you have to give it back. Ultimately, hurak tanai, that's a condition. Kishar tanaim sha'adam yachal hasnais bebichirasai uvematanasai. We have many times, we have the concept of tanaim in business deals. There are conditions. So I gave it to you. It's a matana gemura. And now it's completely yours and it's not mine at all. Ultimately, there's a condition that you do ultimately have to give it back. If you don't give it back, ultimately, then retroactively, it won't be a condition. Now, just a little bit of a side point that Dirshu in footnote number 3 says is very interesting. He says, we're having this whole conversation about matanas and kinyonim on Yom Tov. V'avshe mekachu memkar oser b'Yom Tov. Mekachu memkar is forbidden on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to do business on Yom Tov. V'chein also liten matana b'Yom Tov. You're not allowed to give somebody a gift on Yom Tov. Mikamakam l'tzarech mitzvah. If it's a tzarech mitzvah, kasav le'el shamuter. For a tzarech mitzvah, you are allowed to. I remember in yeshiva when I was a bacher, the fellow who owned the canteen. Sometimes you didn't have a bottle of soda. You weren't expecting to eat in yeshiva. You thought you were eating out. You ended up eating in yeshiva. You wanted a bottle of soda for the suda. You can't buy a bottle of soda from the canteen on Shabbos, right? So what happened? He would give it to you as a matana. And then after Shabbos, eventually you'll pay him. But right now he's giving it to you, b'leiv shalom, as a matana. How are you allowed to give a matana on Shabbos? The answer is, l'tzarech mitzvah, l'tzarech suda Shabbos, l'chvayit Shabbos, you're allowed to give the matana. Okay, now, continues the mechaber. So, a matana almanas lahachzer, the mechaber said, that works. Reuben gives Shimon his daled minim as a matana manas lahachzer. Now Shimon is the total owner of those daled minim. He's makayim lochem, and he can be makayim the mitzvah. But ultimately he has to give it back. Says the mechaber, 2 lines on the bottom in the middle of the line. Ve'im loy hechaziroi. If ultimately Shimon does not return the daled minim to Reuven, layotza. It turns out that he was never makayim the mitzvah. Because in order for the original matana to be chal, in order for the original matana to take effect, to take place, ultimately Shimon has to return the daled minim to Reuven. The gift was conditional upon that. Not only that, says the mechaber, afilu nasan loyes domov. Let's say Shimon does not give the daled minim back to Reuven, but he pays him. He says, look, I brought it home. I don't know where I put it. I'll give you $200. Here's $200. No. The condition of the matana was that you need to give back the daled minim. Paying for the daled minim does not cut it. Not only that, says the mechaber, va'afilu nenas miyadoi. Let's say the fellow took the daled minim, Shimon took the daled minim from Reuven, and then a dog jumped up and ate the esrog. So now he can't return it. What do you want from me? It was an oinus, mamish an oinus. This crazy dog jumped up on me in the street and bit the esrog in half. Well, what was I supposed to do? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it's not your fault. The bottom line is you didn't fulfill the Tanai of the Matana. The Tanai of the Matana was that you had to return it. You didn't return it. And since you didn't return it, the original Matana was not a Matana. Turns out that the daled minim were never lachem. You weren't Mekayim lachem. You weren't Mekayim the mitzvah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, cutting your gimel. V'em lo yachziroi, if ultimately you do not return the daled minim, not only that, says the Chavetz Chaim, v'hu hadin kishenifsal biyodoi v'hechaziroi. Let's say you took the lulav and the esrog from your friend to use it to be Mekayim the mitzvah. He gave it to you matana manas lahachzer. You walked out in the street and the crazy dog jumped up and he took a big bite out of the esrog. And now the esrog is puzzle. It's chasar. It's puzzle. You got a big problem. But you say, listen, I know I have to return it to him, because if I don't return it to him, then the original matana wasn't the matana, and then it turns out retroactively I wasn't Mekayim the mitzvah. So you run back to Reuven and you say, here's your daled minim. Guy looks at the esrog, he says, what are you giving me? This is puzzle. Yes, it's true, it's puzzle, but I was Mekayim the Tanai. The Tanai was, I got to give it back to you. Says the Mechaber, says the Mishnah Berurah here, Ois cutting Yud Gimel. If it became puzzle while it was by you and you gave it back to him, but it's puzzle, that's not called you are Mekayim the Tanai. You are not Mekayim the Tanai. What is that based on? That's what's based on a Ran. The Ran says like this. The Ran says, Umistabra, it makes sense, that when the Gemara says that if somebody gave you the daled minim with a matana manas lahachzir, im hechziroi, if you ultimately return it, yotza, you yotza the mitzvah, because you are Mekayim lachem, says the Ran, dafka b'shehechziroi be'inyan sheyochal adayin lotzeis by. That's only if you return it back to Ruvain in a condition where Ruvain could still use it to be Mekayim the mitzvah. But let's say you give it back to him after the Zman. So you borrowed the daled minim from Ruvain by Shachris. You were davening at you were davening at the early minyan. So he gave it to you. He gave you his daled minim on Matana Manas Lahachzir. You went ahead and you were Mekayim the mitzvah with the daled minim, and now you return it to him la'achar she'avra mitzvasai. You go home, you get busy with the Suda, and then you take a nap, and he doesn't know where you live, and you return it to him tonight. You return it to him the night of the second day of Yom Tov. Says the Ram, lo yotza. Turns out that you weren't yotza. What do you mean I wasn't yotza? It was a matana manas lachzer. It was mam shlachem. And I gave it back to him. What do you mean? I was Mekayim the tonight. Says the Ram, no, you were not Mekayim the tonight. Why? The umden daite hachi heavy. Because we have an umdana. We understand automatically as a default position that when he gave it to you as a matana manas lahachzir, he didn't mean that it's a matana manas lahachzir and it doesn't matter when you return it to me. He expects to use it to be Mekayim the mitzvah. And you held on to it for the entire first day. And because of you, he didn't have his daled minim to be Mekayim the mitzvah. Now, when you return it to him on the second day of Yom Tov, too late, buddy. That's not what he meant when he said matana manas lahachzir. And it doesn't matter that he didn't specify it. That's an umdana. That's an automatic that we evaluated his das, that's what he meant. Same thing applies. The same svara of the Ran applies if you give it to him after a dog bit it in half. The dog bit it in half. It's very nice that you returned it to him, but he can't use it anymore. And since he can't use it to be Mekayim the mitzvah, that's not what he meant when he said matana manas lahachzir, and therefore it was never a matana, and you weren't Mekayim the mitzvah. Okay. Ois cutting your dalet. The Mechaber said, and it doesn't matter if you paid for it. So for some reason you couldn't return it, but he said, don't worry, I'll make good. Here's $250. No, that doesn't help. We don't say, okay, what's the difference? I didn't give him back the daled minim. I paid for them. No. Because that's not what he needs. He doesn't need Benjamins. He doesn't need $100 bills. What he needs daled minim to be Mekayim the mitzvah. So bavadi hikbet al lulav gufe. He wants the daled minim themselves. He doesn't want money. Oiskat and tezvav va'afilu nenas miyodoi. And even if it totally wasn't your fault, it was mamish and oinus. Like I said, a pit bull jumped up and grabbed the esrog and ate it, or bit it in half. So mamish wasn't your fault. It doesn't matter. Bottom line, you didn't return it. Now this is a very lumdish shtickle over here. Says the Chavetz Chaim. Va'afal gav de ladas hamachaber b'choshim mishpit simin reish b'am aleph. Even though the mechaber paskins in choshim mishpat simin reish b'am aleph. B'matana al manas lahachzir. In a case of a matana al manas lahachzir. V'nenas. And then an oinus happened when the item was by the makabel potter b'tashlumin. The makabel is potter. He's exempt. He doesn't have to pay for the item. So let's say, for example, Ruvain gives Shimon a shor. He lends him an ox. He doesn't lend it to him. He gives it to him as a matana al manas lahachzir. So Ruvain, Shimon needs an ox to go plow his field. Why he needs it as a matana manas lahachzir is anybody's guess. I don't know. But Reuven gives it to him as a matana manas lahachzir. Okay? Reuven is using the shar, and the shar drops dead. It's time to give the shar back to Shimon. He doesn't have a shar to give back. He has a dead shar. The shar died. Mamish nenas. It's mamish anoinus. Does Ruvain have to pay for the shar? So the Mechaber paskins that no, he doesn't have to pay. He doesn't have to pay. Now, the lumdus over here is very interesting. Again, Ruvain gave Shimon the shar as a matana manas lahachzer. Now Shimon cannot return the shar to Ruvain. He can't return it because an oinus happened. It's gone. He can't return it. So if he's not going to return it, that means he was not Mekayim the T'nai. If he was not Mekayim the T'nai, that means that the original matana was never a matana. If the original matana was never a matana, so then the shar never belonged to Shimon. The shar always belonged to the original owner, Ruvain. It never belonged to Shimon. Now, if the shar never belonged to Shimon, if it always belonged to Ruvain, so then why doesn't Shimon have to pay for it? You see, if you want to make the argument that somehow it belonged to Shimon, so then maybe I understand why Shimon doesn't have to pay Ruvain. The reason he doesn't have to pay Ruvain is, listen, you gave me a matana, the shar was mine. When the oinus happened and the shar vanished, it's my shar that vanished. Now, you're out of shar, too bad, you're out of shar. But if you were never Mekayim the T'nai because you never gave it back. If you were never Mekayim the T'nai, that means the matana was never a matana. If the matana was never a matana, then the shar always belonged to the original owner. Yet, the Mechaber paskins that you don't have to pay. Now, the fact that you don't have to pay, the fact that you don't have to pay sounds like an argument for considering it to be yours. Because then it would make sense. The reason you don't have to pay is because, what do you mean? It's my shar that was nenas. It's my shar that vanished. So why do I have to pay you? It's not yours, it's mine. You gave it to me as a matana. Right? So the fact that the Mechaber paskins in Choshen Mishpat, that by a matana al manas lahachzir, if an oinus happens while the makabel has it, and the makabel doesn't have to pay, it sounds like it's an argument to argue that it belongs to the makabel, even though the makabel never returned it. Since he never returned it because of an oinus, somehow it's his. Now, if that was the case, so then the same thing would apply over here. If the Noisin gave the Makabel the Dal minim and the Matana Manas Lahachzir, and the Makabel wasn't able to give it back to the Noisin because of an Oinus, maybe he should be Yoitza anyway, even though he never gave it back. But over here we pass him that he's not Yoitza. So says the Mishnah Berurah like this. V'afagav deladasa machaber b'chishim mishpat simin reish b'malaf b'matana manas lahachzir v'nenas pater b'tashumin hainu mishum de'ena lov din shomer shaharei b'teres matana bali yadai. Says the Chavetz Chaim, there's a big difference between here in Orach Chaim and over there in Choshen Mishpat. Over there in Choshen Mishpat, the Mechaber paskins that the Makabel doesn't have to pay the Noisin. You know why? Because even though it's true that the Makabel was never Mekayim the T'nai, and since the Makabel was never Mekayim the T'nai, it turns out that the shar always belonged to the original owner. And since the shar always belonged to the original owner, now it sounds like the Makabel should have to pay. Because what do you mean? It was Ruvain's shar. Right? So this is like Hilchas Shomrim 101. Ruvain had a shar. Ruvain gave it to Shimon with a matana manas lahachzir. Shimon was never Mekayim the T'nai. He never gave it back to Ruvain. Why? Because of an oinus. But now that he never gave it back to Ruvain and he wasn't Mekayim the T'nai, that means that Ruvain never really gave it to Shimon as a matana. So who owned the shar? Who owned the shar? The whole time it was by Shimon, Ruvain. And now an oinus happened and the shar is gone. So Ruvain is out of shar, and he's out of shar that was by Shimon. So why doesn't Shimon have to pay? The answer is the reason Shimon doesn't have to pay is because he was never Mikabel Shmira on it. He never became a shomer. he never accepted upon himself the liability of being a shomer. He accepted Reuven's shar as a matana. He didn't accept it as a pekadon. So he never accepted upon himself the liabilities of a shomer. That's why he doesn't have to pay. Not because the matana was a real matana. No, the matana was not a real matana. Because Shimon was never mekayim the Tanai and he never gave it back. So it was not a real matana. And the shar always belonged to Reuven. But the reason Shimon is potter is because he was never makabel shmira. When he accepted the shar, he accepted it as a gift, not as a pekadon. See, that's what the Mishnah Berurah says over here. Hainu mishum de'ena lov din shomer. Shimon never became a shomer. Because when he received that shar, he received it as a matana. Now, it's true that in the end, retroactively, it never ended up being a matana, because he never was mekayim the Tanai that the gift hinged upon. But he still was mekabel it as a matana. And since he was mekabel it as a matana, he never accepted upon himself the liabilities of a shomer. And if he didn't accept upon himself the chiyuv of a shomer, then you can't stick him with those. You can't stick him with those liabilities. And therefore he's potter and Reuven is out of shar. Aval, however, says the Chavetz Chaim, I'll call upon him at Tlain loy niskayim, ve'ene elo kepikadon biyadai. He was never mekayim the Tanai, so it's not his. So again, in our case, Reuven gave Shimon the daled minim. While Shimon had the daled minim, a pit bull came and ate the esrog. So now he can't return the daled minim. But it was an oinus. But he can't return them. Since he can't return them, he's not mekayim the Tanai. Since he's not mekayim the Tanai, it turns out that the daled minim were never his. Since the daled minim were never his, he wasn't mekayim lochem. Since he wasn't mekayim lochem, he wasn't mekayim the mitzvah. Does he have to pay for the esrog? No, he doesn't have to pay for the esrog. Why? Because he was never mekabel to be a shomer. He received the esrog as a gift, not as a pekadon. So he was never mekabel on himself the chiyuvim of a shomer. Very cute Chavetz Chaim. Mashbe mereva paiskim, says the Chavetz Chaim, the implication of the majority of the paiskim is that in this case, paying for the esrog also isn't going to help. Just like we said before, the Tanai was that you're going to give back the daled minim, not that you're going to pay for them. However, take a look at the Chayodam Shemistapik. He has a question in another interesting case. Im Amar Hareini Ki'ilu Hiskabalti Mahu. What happens if Reuven gives the daled minim as a matana manas la'achzir to Shimon, and then an oinus happens that Shimon can't return them? Shimon goes back to Reuven. He says, I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't give you back the daled minim. They're gone. The pit bull ate the esrog. I can't give it back to you. And now that I can't give it back to you, I have two problems. One, I can't return your daled minim. Two, it turns out I was never yotze the mitzvah because I can't be mekayim the Tanai. So Reuven says, don't worry about it. Hareinu Ki'ilu Hiskabalti. I'm moichel. It's as if I was mekabelit. Chayodam de is mesupik, whether or not that helps. Ubesefer meiri ksavyada shetachas yodi, but the Chavetz Chaim says, I found in the meiri, the Chavetz Chaim says he had a ksavyad, he had a handwritten meiri, daita behedya, to yachal anoisin limchal. Tonight, the meiri says that the noisin can be moichel, v'loimer hareinu kilu his kabalti, v'yotzezei de chavosai afagav shaloi hechser. Ois katan tezayin. Says the Mishnah Berurah, la'achaz man mitzvasai. Oh, you didn't read that inside yet. The bottom line in the Mechaber. V'cheinem echsira la'achaz man mitzvasai lo yotza. If Shimon returned the daled minim to Reuven, but it's too late for Reuven to be mekayim the mitzvah. Like I said, Shimon took the daled minim from Reuven as a matana manas la'achzir in the morning by Shachris, and now he's returning them at night, the night of the second day Yom Tov. So the owner didn't have the daled minim all day. On the first day of Yom Tov, he couldn't be mekayim the mitzvah. Says the Mechaber, Shimon is not yotze, because again, the das of the noisin was when he said a matana maslahachzir that you're going to give it back to me with enough time that I should be able to be mekayim the mitzvah. You gave it back to me too late, so you aren't mekayim the Tanai. You're not yotze. Says the Mishnah Berurah, lachas ma mitzvasai. Ritzayin alarmar. What the Mechaber wants to say is, afilu ba'isi hayoim. Even if you gave it to him on that day. If he gave it back to him too late, it's already after Shkia, it's already night. Well, Shkia is ready. Ben Hashmashis is a suffix. Vim b'shashin also like far berachalav. But if you give it back to the owner after the owner was already yoytz to the mitzvah, so Reuven gave Shimon the minim as a matana manas lahachzir, but he gave it to him after he was already mekayim the mitzvah. So now you don't have to give it back to him on the first day because he doesn't need it anymore for the first day. But you have to give it back to him for the second day. And this is true even if the time was never specified. This is a clear umdana. That means that we don't need him to state it. We know that that's what he meant. When he gave it as a matana, amanas lahachzir, he means amanas that you're going to give it back to me with enough time that I'm going to have it when I need it. The kasa paiskim, the paiskim, right? This is a very interesting halacha. It's very complex. There's a very lengthy biur halacha here. I'm not going to get into it. But the paiskim say that all of this raid that we're talking about here is only when the Noisin says, Al manas shetachsirehu li. It's a matana, not just a matana al manas lahachzir, a matana with a condition that you'll return it. It's a matana with the condition that you will return it li, to me. The mashba, because that carries the implication, I want you to return it to me because I have a personal need to use it for what it's meant to be used for. So amanas shetachsireu li litzarchi, for my needs, for the needs that I have for it. But if all he says is amanas that you'll return it, but he leaves out that word li, v'lo li, then afilu achzir lachar achag. Even if you return the minim after Yom Tov, she'ena shava klum, when they're not even worth anything anymore, nami kiyim tanoi, you were makayim your tanai v'yotza, and your yotza. Vayin biur halacha, however, he cautions you to look at the biur halacha, where he brings down many shittas that disagree with this distinction. Okay, I think that was a very fascinating share. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schools of limud HaTorah should be making on God's Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe should send Yeshua's for his parnasa tzedukah to all those in need, and we should be zeicher to see the bias gal tzedek b'meher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.